Jeffrey Deitch Gallery and Joe Coleman's Carnival. Enjoy.
Well, welcome to my carnival. You know, this exhibition, took a year for this exhibition to be put together, but, it's a lifetime, my lifetime in the making. I mean, it's very much, a dream world that I've been connected to since childhood. When I was very young, around 9 or 10, a neighbor of mine was going to, his family invited him to New York City, and my parents, condoned to have, to allow me to go with them. And so when they went to New York City, they brought me to Times Square. And, it was Times Square back in the 60s, when it was a real sleazy den, of vice and this was amazing to me. Like the first thing I remember was seeing these giant cardboard cutouts of burlesque stars, and they seemed like 40 feet high in my imagination. And then I would peek in and see what was going on inside, and I would see these amazing shows that the girls were putting on. And then they took me to Hubert's Museum, which was a very famous old dime museum, one of the greatest, certainly the greatest one, in the later part of New York City's dime museums. And at Hubert's Museum, I saw my first freak show, and I got to meet the one and only William Dirks, who was kind of promoted as Hatchet Face or the Three-Eyed Man, even though he really didn't have a third eye. He just painted it up here in his head. And he had this physical deformity that did kind of make him look like his face was split in two. And he was very kind to me, and he did a drawing for me, and I was really fascinated by him. And he did the drawing on one of his pitch cards, and I still have it. I also got to see my very first flea circus, and the flea circus, much to my surprise, was a real thing. It wasn't a phony thing. There were actually fleas carrying little chariots, and I was amazed by that. Then I was taken to this wax museum that had a torture chamber of these figures in wax being tortured. And, there was, painted blood on them and, at various stages of torture. And then on the wall was this tiny door with the doorway open and an eye staring out. And I was like, wow, and when I got home, I couldn't get it out of my head. It was so, it thrilled my childhood imagination. And I just said to myself, as this little kid, when I grew up, I want to live there, where those people are, that's my place. And, and then eventually I did, move to Manhattan as soon as I was 18, and and I lived first in the Chelsea area, and I was a cab driver. It was back in the Travis Bickle era. So I saw amazing things in my taxi cab that influenced my paintings at that time. And eventually in my cab I got to go to Coney Island. And I was always wondering, was it going to live up to my expectations? When I finally got my cab out there, and it not only lived up to my expectations, it surpassed them. It was even better than I imagined. And so, in a way, this show is a way to kind of celebrate that and to kind of recreate my child's imagination of what brought me here in the first place. So what happened was, about a year ago, the largest art book of my career to date was published by Fantagraphics, called A Doorway to Joe. And it's big 450-page book that you could kill somebody with. It weighs so much. And so I was touring with the book, and when I went to LA, I contacted Jeffrey Deitch, who I had worked with, a couple of times in the past, and I asked him, because I was doing a signing at the art bookstore called Hauser and Wirth in Los Angeles, and I just called him up and asked him if he would be into interviewing me for the book signing, because I often have, some art-related person or an author or something, an actor, interview me for these book signings. And he said, sure, he would love to. And so, after the book signing, he threw a big party at his house to celebrate the book. And then he just, at the end of the night, he got to talking to me, and we were talking for a while, and somehow he came up with this idea that he wanted me to curate a Carnival show at the gallery. And that was, essentially about a year ago, so surprisingly, it took, a year to put this together. But, what I wanted to do was to use not only contemporary artists that have been inspired by the Carnival, even though, a lot of, I'm one of them, a lot of them are my friends, and, and I knew I could reach out to them. But I also wanted to use the artisans of the actual Carnival, whether it's the great banner painters, puppet makers, creators of waxworks, even, the miniature worlds and flea circuses. I wanted to, get the real artisans that made those things and exhibit their works alongside of the contemporary art that's inspired by it. And, it's such a personal project, that a lot of the artists that I've chosen for this exhibition also appear in my paintings. Several of the actual artists are here. Most of them actual living artists that are currently in the show that are also in my paintings. Some dead, that I just honor, historically. And so this is really, a kind of a gift celebration, of my family, Gooble Gobble, one of us, and so now welcome to my family. I'll give you a little tour. This piece over here was done by a friend of mine. I've been friends with him for probably more than a decade, and I've always admired his work, and we've become, very good friends. Tom Duncan was born in 1939 in a mining village in Scotland, and so it was just, of the beginnings of World War II. And he grew up with the beginnings of World War II and actual battles being, fought around him. And this very much influenced all of his work, everything that he's ever done. And there's been many of his works that I've loved, like The Execution of Private Slovik and War Toy for a German Child, which involved a concentration camp done in miniature like this with little trains and little toy figures. And I always liked, his use, of toys in his work. I sometimes, do that myself. Now, this particular piece, I think, is the greatest work of art ever done about Coney Island. And I mean, I've seen, everything on Coney Island and have loved it and admire all the works on Coney Island. But this particular piece, which took 25 years to make, I think is the ultimate statement about Coney Island. And, it's like a game, it's like a sideshow game. It's like the miniature world and flea circus, and it's also, full of like the banners and the trains and the Ferris wheel. At one point, all of this was actually working. It's entirely mechanized, and all of these actual buttons here work and cause the trains to run, causes the Ferris wheel to move. There's also lights inside the Carnival ghost rides here. I just think it's such a wonderful piece because it also honors the childhood awe that captured my imagination, and, it's true to it, it makes me excited just, looking at this piece, and wanting to play with this huge play set, entirely dedicated to Coney Island. And it was a labor of love on Tom's part. And when I first decided to do this show, this was one of the first pieces that I thought of that I really want for this show. So I'm honored to have this amazing piece. This next piece was done by the artist Narcissista, and she's a feminist performance artist born in 1971 and works in Brooklyn. I obviously, if you know anything about my work, I love very subversive artworks, and she's one of the most subversive, dealing with themes of sex, race, identity, and she does this in these performances in which she is masked and in various outrageous costumes. No one knows who she is, so she remains anonymous, which I think adds to the mysterious, subversive quality of her work. And I really love her work. And this is one of the most outrageous pieces. I love this piece in the show. Let me first show you how it works. It's an incredible piece. It conjures up so many transgressive things around sexuality, around machines. It relates to the carnival in, the kind of figures that would be in a ghost train or dark ride, in which there'll be figures that are crudely mechanical that will kind of move out at you as your train goes through the spook house, the haunted house. There's also an element of the Muybridge kind of photography that film came from, right between her legs, which is also really fascinating and also relates to, the sideshow and dime museum's connection to technology. Like they embraced the first motion pictures. They were seen in dime museums and sideshows. So it's kind of wonderful, to have all of these elements in this, seemingly, innocent and childlike sculpture that is so disturbing. I think there's something wonderful about her work that kind of gets under your skin in a very tricky way, and I think she's awesome. She's a great young artist. This is the work of John Donavant. He's a master painter, and these techniques that he's using in this amazing piece that was just finished for the show, are techniques used by scenic painters and old scenic painters. There's a whole lot of his great knowledge that goes into this painting. But I think his actual greatest work of art, which goes back to what I was talking about before, he's not only a great contemporary artist, but he is one of the true artisans of the Carnival, because he invented Theater Bazaar in Detroit, which has existed for now 25 years, although it did close a few years ago. But Theater Bazaar started in these fairgrounds in Detroit, often, illegally. And he would throw on these huge, Halloween parties, that were incredibly mad and true to the great, crazy spirit of the Carnival. Eventually, he found this Masonic temple, the Detroit Masonic Temple, that he finally had a house for Theater Bazaar. And in the Masonic Temple, he used 8 of the 16 floors of this Masonic Temple to turn it into like this madhouse of mazes, ghost trains, live performances, all happening at once in this amazing Masonic temple. You could never see everything in the entire temple. Whitney and I went there and were totally blown away by it. And it's a legendary place. And, eventually that was closed down too. But he is, the spirit of the Carnival. And this is also just a great work of art in itself. But I'm also honoring what he's given to the tradition of the Carnival with Theater Bazaar in Detroit. Next, we have this fine train here. And this train here, the fact that it's here blows my mind. It's Johnny Eck's actual train that he drove in carnivals and sold tickets to children who would ride in this actual train. Each car used to have a specific name, from Mother Goose or Aesop's Fables. And I actually drove this train. It caught fire when I was driving it because I had it up full throttle. And to have it in this exhibit is, to my great pleasure. I'm just so happy it's here. As I was saying earlier, I view, the exhibition has, a lot of things from my personal archive of Carnival artifacts. Being in the field, I know so many collectors like myself that collect this sort of thing. And even though I have a pretty good Johnny Eck collection, I decided not to show my collection, but show the greatest collection of Johnny Eck's work. And this is a collection by Jeffrey Pratt Gordon, who has this single-minded collection that is specifically on the works of Johnny Eck. He owns not only the train, he owns Johnny Eck's home, which he, will eventually open the Johnny Eck Museum in. The puppets, the Johnny Eck's erotic drawings that are here are part of this amazing collection. And I reached out to Jeff when I decided to make the show, and he was thrilled to be part of it. And I'm honored that, Jeff has shared these amazing works for the show, as he did for me when I painted Johnny Eck. I was allowed to go through all of these artifacts in the making of my portrait of Johnny Eck. It's a wonderful, to have these kind of kindred spirits out there in the world. I'm very fortunate, that the people that I asked to participate in this dream show were all, more than happy to get on board. The puppet show was always a part of the history of the Carnival. And Johnny Eck was a great craftsman, and he was kind of a well-known artist in Baltimore, primarily for doing these screen paintings up there that were on window screens. A folk art tradition that exists only in Baltimore, by the way, but he was famous for doing those. But he also was, this great puppet master. He made all of these puppets and put on his own puppet shows in Baltimore, and with traveling sideshows as well. And I just think they're wonderful, and it's so great to have them in this exhibition. Also in the Johnny Eck section of the exhibition, there's this wonderful work of art produced by Spectral Motion. Mike Elizalde, I befriended a few years ago, and I commissioned him to do this piece of Johnny Eck for the show. And it was so sweet of him to actually make this amazing, lifelike image of Johnny. I feel like Johnny's actually here. And thanks to Spectral Motion for producing this, amazing work of art. The actual, this is not the actual stool, but the actual stool is in the show. But this one, though, we couldn't afford having him on it. But it's such a great piece. When I was a teenager, I first came across the amazing film Freaks by director Tod Browning. And, it's maybe the greatest film ever directed about a traveling freak show. And all the performers are real performers. It created a scandal when it was released and pretty much destroyed Tod Browning's career, who was famous for Lon Chaney Sr. films and maybe most famous for Dracula, the Bela Lugosi version. But Freaks, is in a lot of ways, and in my opinion, a better film and a more powerful film. And one of the great stars of Freaks is the very charismatic performance by Johnny Eck, who was born not only without legs, but without the lower half of his body, although he did have genitals. Now, this was a painting that I did in 1994 about Tod Browning. And, it involves Tod Browning's, whole life, including his causing the death of the actor Elmer Booth when he was drunk at the wheel. Elmer Booth was the star of Musketeers and Pig Alley, which was D.W. Griffith, one of the first gangster films ever done. This is his headstone. There's the wrecked car. Browning survived the accident. Many of the actors from Freaks are in the painting. Significantly, also, at the end of Tod Browning's life, he developed throat cancer, cancer of the esophagus, and they had to remove his vocal cords. That's what this is. And there's something very much Tod Browning-like, and the great silent film director can no longer talk, is robbed of his vocal cords. It's very much like one of his films, and so this, was the painting that gave birth to this painting, because Johnny Eck is pointing to this painting, because now I center the whole painting around the life of Johnny Eck. And as I was explaining before, I had the great ability to be able to look at Johnny's own hand, this amazing collection that Jeffrey Gordon had amassed of watercolors, erotic drawings, puppets, screen paintings, all of these things, his actual diaries, all of these things then filtered through me to produce this painting. So I would, try to draw in Johnny's hands, little erotic drawings, him painting his watercolors, his puppets, all of these things I got to have firsthand knowledge of. Here's one of his diaries back there. And I read every single one of the diaries and chose specific text related, to the diaries to, resurrect Johnny, bring him back to life. And I was able to do this by having access to this amazing wealth of Johnny Eck material. And that shows the way that I do the research on the subjects of my paintings. And it also goes back to, who which we're going to get into a little bit more, is that a lot, of the artists in this exhibition are also in my paintings.
Put me on. Put me on. Put me on.
This amazing piece, one of my favorites, was done specifically for this exhibition by Jo Weldon, and she created the New York School of Burlesque. She's also an activist that has fought for the rights of sex workers. She's a sex worker herself, and has also talked at the UN about the need for actually even the term sex work, and that there are women who, are not forced into sex work, but that do it voluntarily, and she's fighting for their rights. And she's part of our family, and I love her dearly. She appears in several of my paintings. We were having dinner at Keen's Chop House, my favorite restaurant in New York City, and I had been wanting to put her in the show, but she had never made a work of art before. And I asked her if she could produce something for the exhibition, and I didn't tell her what to do. I didn't mind if it was one of her costumes or anything she wanted to do. But what she came up with was this amazing doll, and this doll wears a history of sex work dating back to ancient times, to contemporary times. It tells a whole history. Even, the perfume bottle is related. And Jo Weldon is an authority, a historian on, the clothing worn, by sex workers throughout the ages. And she talks about their connection, to high fashion, how they inspire high fashion, and also the fashions of, of the society that they live in eventually. So it's a fascinating work of art that she produced with many secret compartments inside of the doll herself that only Jo has told me about, but I'm not going to tell you. And it's, it's just such a wonderful piece that also speaks to the doll in the carnival culture, because, first you might think of the Cupid doll, which is so much a part of the carnival. But also the wax figure is also a kind of doll, in itself. So it's such a clever, amazing work of art. One of my favorites in the exhibition, and the voice that you're hearing throughout this entire admiration of this work of art is Jo Weldon's voice saying, "Put me on." I love it. About 20 years ago, Whitney and I had fantasy coffins made of us in Ghana. There's 2 fantasy coffins and these 2 were done by Theophilus Ni Anamzoa. And these are beautifully, hand-carved wooden and painted masterpieces, of us. For us, we wanted a kind of more Egyptian style with our presence being on the outside of the coffin. And it blew our minds when they finally arrived, even though they haven't been to our home yet. They've been on display at the Museum of Death in Los Angeles for a few years, in storage for a while. But when they leave this exhibition, we finally have room now that we have a big house upstate. So we're finally going to have our coffins come home. So I'm looking forward to getting these kids to our house. Can't wait. One of the things that I'm really interested in celebrating in this exhibition is the actual artisans of the carnival. And one of the things you always, associate, with traveling circuses and sideshows is the great banners. that were kind of the come on that drew people into a tent show. Sometimes the actual performance in the tent was disappointing compared to the amazing banners that were produced as a come on to bring people in. I really wanted to, in particular, honor Johnny Mia because, in my mind, Johnny Mia, is one of the only living legends, of the golden age of sideshow banner painting. But he was a juggler, sword swallower, fire eater, clown. He was also technical advisor on many films and television shows, that had the sideshow as a setting for whatever drama was going on. And Johnny's work is truly unique. He had his own vision. He's also, a really funny writer. He was born in 1937. And, so he's, the only one left of those original Golden Age banner painters. And he is still painting. He lives in Florida. He doesn't do the large banners anymore. He works on smaller pieces now, but he's still at it. And these I wanted to make sure were in the show and also available. I don't know if this one's available, but one of them is, and he's still selling work. And God bless Johnny Mia and the sideshow banner painters. I'm thankful for them, and I'm thankful for you, Johnny. So, in a way, it seems like the antithesis of what I do today, but in a way, I started out as a banner painter myself. And this painting, Steel Tips, was done of my band, Steel Tips, my punk rock band from the 1970s. And I painted this with the same way I even paint today, with no sketching. I didn't sketch it out, I just start painting. And we would unfurl this banner, in front of like the nightclubs that we were performing at. We played at a prison, we played at a nut house, all around the New York, New Jersey, upstate New York area as well. These are all the members of the band. And at that time, I had a big ponytail at the top of my head. So that character towards the bottom with reaching the hand out is me. And you'll see another character in this painting who's got a giant striped cap. His name is Patrick McDonnell. He was the drummer in Steel Tips, and one of his paintings are in this exhibition. He and I have been friends since Steel Tips, and he became famous for doing a comic strip called Mutts, which was a syndicated comic strip that a lot of people know. And unbeknownst to the people that know his comic strip Mutts, he is also a very good abstract painter. And when I saw his abstract paintings, I saw that he always included a cartoon character. Maybe he couldn't help himself because he is a cartoonist. So they would sneak into these abstract paintings, and I asked him if he would do a Carnival inspired abstract painting, and it's in the clown room up there. And I'll show you a little bit of that later on, but this is the oldest of my paintings on exhibit. It's rarely ever seen. It was only since the Steel Tips days, it was only seen once before in my exhibition at the Kunstwerk in Berlin, Germany, which was a 4-floor exhibit of my work. And that's the only other time that it was ever shown. So it's been a while since this one was shown. Around the time that I reached the age of 50, I embarked on this diptych. It took up the entire decade of my 50s, and it started with Doorway to Joe, which is my largest self-portrait that I ever made. And it was an attempt in my 50s to search for the meaning of my life. I'm starting to reconsider where I've been, and so this was a painting that was kind of a diary of events that happened as they occurred. Also, memories from the past, my trials and tribulations throughout, my entire life. And when I completed this particular painting, it needed a companion piece. And so then I embarked on the Doorway to Whitney painting. And together, these two paintings took up that entire decade. It was the only real work that I produced within that entire decade, from 50 to 60. With the Doorway to Whitney, I just, tried to bring forth everything in me, all of my abilities. I reached into places that I hadn't, gone before in my work. I was searching to produce this epic poem of love to the most amazing creature that I've been blessed with in this lifetime. This was what the painting was, and I want to now introduce the amazing inspiration, my wife, muse, my everything, Whitney Ward.
So this painting, A Doorway to Whitney, which I'm beyond honored that Joe produced and spent over 4.5 years making as the companion piece to A Doorway to Joe. It became the centerpiece of the 13-year documentary, How Dark My Love, that Scott Gratcheff directed, which started as a documentary about Joe and evolved into quite an intense love story. But the central figure of the film is really the creation of this painting.
Another, amazing thing, about, Whitney is she's also, one of my favorite artists too. She's a, killer photographer, and she likes to say photographer, and I really wanted her photographs in the exhibition. I've just always, loved her photographs and her amazing costumes, which are also on exhibit in the show, and I just think she's great.
Well, thank you very much. Well, as Joe mentioned before, this is quite a personal show for him and for myself, and I wanted to include photographs that I had taken over the years of many people who had been either directly involved in this show or in a secondary way. This is Julie Atlas Muse, who was dressed as a leech for a Mermaid Parade one year. This is my very dear friend Camille 2000, who is a burlesque performer whose beautiful assless blue burlesque dress is seen in this show as well. This is my adopted daughter Bambi, dressed as a trout for Mermaid Parade one year. So a lot of these are from Coney Island. This is Femme Appeal, a wonderful burlesque performer and member of our kind of extended family. This is the two-headed baby that Joe painted for me for my maternity nurse Mermaid Parade costume at Coney Island one year. This is the year that I was a piranha in the same, in a different Mermaid Parade at Coney. Miss Cherry Delight, who's a burlesque performer behind the scenes at one of her shows. Faux Pas Le Fay, again, another burlesque performer, family member who will actually be performing at the closing party for this exhibition. And she's a regular performer at the Coney Island Sideshow. And this is a year that Joe and I were at Coney Island for another mermaid parade, and this is the Sheila costume that he had painted. And then I had Garrow Sparrow, who's a costume designer friend of mine, and Rob Marbury, who does taxidermy, create the costume based on Joe's painting. I've been participating in the Coney Island Mermaid Parade for over 30 years. The group that I like to march with, which is Bambi's Burlesque at the Beach group, this particular year was a polar theme. So I decided to be an orca, and I drew this out with the little clubbed baby seal purse, and I had my very good friend, Mr. Gorgeous, who's a well-known burlesque performer and genius costume maker, and he executed my vision. So this is my orca for the 2023 Coney Island Mermaid Parade. So this costume I had made based on the painting that Joe had done in A Doorway to Joe of Sheila, who is a mythological sea creature from Ulysses. And I had the costume constructed by my good friend Garrow Sparrow, who's a really spectacular costume designer. So he made this. It has a functioning ass-gina. And then these pieces, which were the wolves, I had made by my friend, the taxidermist, Rob Marbury. So this is Sheila from the 2009 Coney Island Mermaid Parade. So last year, Joe and I had the great honor and privilege of being asked to be the king and queen of the Coney Island Mermaid Parade. And this is a costume that I had designed for the parade that I had made by my dear friend, Mr. Gorgeous, the wonderful and talented burlesque performer and costume designer. So this is my octopus queen from the Coney Island Mermaid Parade.
Tell me about the artistic inspiration. So where does it come from that you make these kind of pieces? Tell me about the percolation of your art form.
I think I woke up the day after the Mermaid Parade the year before, and I started sketching this. So I knew that I wanted to do some kind of crazy octopus queen. And then when they asked us to be the king and queen, then it got even more glamorous. We made the headpiece much more ornate. But this was the original idea. I like things to be pretty bloody, typically. But for this, we needed more regal-looking blood, so this is just the idea of blood here that Mr. Gorgeous interpreted with kind of sequins instead of me kind of getting everybody all goopy with fake blood. But yeah, I start drawing them all year, and then I kind of see which I want to pursue and what makes sense to actually have constructed. So over the years, I started, making them myself with hot glue and zip ties and staples, and it was, with varying degrees of success. And then lately, I've been having my ideas actually manufactured by people that know what they're doing. So this is my coffin that was made in West Africa, along with Joe's, and they did them based on our wedding pictures. And I like that they made all of these, in addition to Joe's, all the things on his vest, they even did my cross, and they did all these other little bits of jewelry. They even have a little stash box. I think I had told them that in my corset, I had a little pouch sewn in that housed a little bit of my mother's ashes. So they put this in for me. And the gloves were actually made, my real gloves, my best friend and maid of honor, Ellie, gave me 7 inches of her hair that she cut off for me. And we glued iridescent scarab beetles on it with little rubies, and her hair hung down from the gloves. There's a great picture after this. They constructed this. They have a picture of the guys that made it lifting the lid off the coffin, and they were all going in horror. It was made in West Africa. Yeah, they're fantasy coffins. So there's a whole tradition of coffin making in West Africa where whatever you were interested in life, whether it was a hobby or your profession, like an accountant might want to be buried in a pencil, or if you liked a particular kind of car, they would carve whatever kind of car, and you would be buried in that. Or if you were a lobster fisherman, one of my favorites that I've ever seen was a giant, like 9-foot lobster that one gentleman was buried in. So when we decided that we wanted to have our coffins made, we decided to just give them our wedding pictures and see what would happen. And I think it took them several tries to get, this likeness. But they really, I think, did a phenomenal job.
I guess it was back in the 1980s that when I was a cab driver, I started out in the Travis Bickle era, as I was telling you before. But in the 1980s, as I would do in those days, I pulled over my cab. I was in the Times Square area to get a drink. And so I pull over, it's the Westies area where the Irish gangs are. And so it's pretty cool, but really seedy area. And I go into the bar, and there's a guy passed out in the bar. And this ventriloquist dummy was sitting right next to him on the bar. And this ventriloquist dummy was insulting everybody in the bar. And the people in the bar were getting pretty pissed off. And they wanted to beat him up. And so I felt bad for him. So I was, I was going over to him. No, leave him alone. Come on, man. He's drunk, right? Just leave him alone, And I helped him out of the bar, and when I got him into my cab, I asked him where he lived, and I got him home, took care of him, and we became really good friends. And then years later, when Whitney and I were together, it turns out you knew him too, right?
Yeah, I used to work in a bar. It was my recreational job, getting paid for what I was going to be doing anyway. So I worked at probably the same Westies bar in Times Square, around that area. And I met the same person, Peter, who I would sometimes have to 86 from my bar.
For the same antics.
Same antics, with the same dummy.
So in 2000, we got married, and it was 11/11/2000, so 11/11/00. And Whitney and I got to talking, and I just thought it would be great if he marries us, if he performs a ceremony. And I don't mean the ventriloquist, I mean him, Dutch. That's his name, Dutch, because the ventriloquist is not really a professional ventriloquist. It's his alter ego. So he just is this other person, and I wanted Dutch to marry us. And in fact, he did, and there's some wedding footage of us in the back room with other really great footage. This sharkskin suit that you see him wearing, I had that specially made for him just for the wedding. So that's not what he originally wore in the bars. But thank you, Dutch. It's nice to have you in the show.
So did you exchange vows with him? How did you?
Yeah.
We did.
Yeah,
I think
he performed the whole ceremony. He got a little bit out of control sometimes, but he had to be smacked back in line every once in a while.
And it was legal.
Yeah, because Peter, his handler, is a member of the Universal Life Church. So it was a legal ceremony.
Wonderful. Happily ever after. Here we are.
Happily ever
Thank you,
after.
Dutch.
Thank you, Dutch.
Here's another wonderful, amazing artist whose work that I've loved for so many years, and she's a member of our family, Laura Kaplan. And, you know, she's one of the artists who's in my work and also in this exhibition. So I want to show her amazing sculptures over here. Truly, you know, unique, awesome pieces. Look at, I wanted to set them up as like a whole little environment that they are, which is really quite extraordinary. I mean, she really puts the carnal in Carnival. I mean, these things are, you know, they're sexy, they're disturbing, they're Frankenstein-like. I mean, they're just truly amazing. They seem like living creatures from another world that are here visiting this planet. You know, I just think they're, you know, they're extraordinary. They're alien creatures, they're, you know, mystical creatures, living things, you know, and they're alive. I love her work. This painting over here is the one I was describing by the former drummer of my punk rock band, Steel Tips. And even though he's known for the Mutts syndicated comic strip, you know, he's been doing these abstract paintings that have not been seen, that only by very few people in small shows. But I really wanted to, since I really like his work, I wanted to feature one of his works in the show. And that's, I guess, the Hulk as a clown, you know, being humiliated, which I find interesting. And so that's one of my oldest friends, Patrick McDonald, from my old band from the 1970s, the punk rock band Steel Tips over there. You know, there's something about the, you know, the comic strip that also, in my mind, relates to the Carnival. It's caricature, you know, of the world turned upside down, the alternative universe, and satire that's always been a part of the Carnival. So, you know, that part of his career, I think, is also interesting too, that connects to the Carnival. The two figures behind us that greet anyone who enters the gallery are two very important people in our lives, Bambi the Mermaid and Chuck Varga. Do you want to explain, well, you did explain a little bit about Bambi before. You want to...
Well, Bambi the Mermaid, Queen of Coney Island, is my adopted daughter. And Chuck Varga, who was one of the founding members of the band Guar, is also a fantastic costume designer and artist in his own right. And Bambi's a very talented artist as well. She has some work in the show, some beautiful photographs. We introduced them about 10 years ago in preparation for the Coney Island Mermaid Parade. Chuck had helped me construct one of my costumes. That year it was a octopus lobster, I think. And Joe and I both thought that they would be kind of wonderful together, but we had to finesse it.
For many years in Guar, and Indian Larry was really important to us too. You know, I gave Bambi away to her former husband, Indian Larry, and Bambi had never really found, you know, someone that she could really connect it with ever since Larry died. And somehow, you know, we both felt that there would be something special between the two of them. And so it was, what was the wonderful thing that Chuck said?
Oh, I asked what I could pay him for him helping me for weeks on my Mermaid Parade costume, and he said, just get me a mermaid. So we didn't just get him a mermaid, we got him the mermaid.
Yeah. And this is, Whitney's, you know, talked about Bambi before, but you should know that Bambi's also very famous for her costumes. And this is one, you know, that she designed, and it's a really amazing piece. And this is a piece by Chuck, who, you know, as anyone who knows Guar, you know, the band, I mean, it's all about their crazy characters, you know, that they make. So these are works of art by, you know, our dear, loved family.
And this is also the ring that Chuck proposed to Bambi with that he made. I did tell him that he had to actually get a ring that she could wear, but this is the ring that he proposed to her with. And in addition to designing this costume, he also constructed it. I believe Garrow Sparrow actually constructed this costume that Bambi had designed as her wedding gown.
And there's a great, I performed also the ceremony that married the two of them, because they did fall in love, which is a great story in itself. And then, like Dutch, I did the ceremony that married these two lovebirds. There's a wonderful video document of the event that we also have on display in the video room. The power invested in me by all you amazing sea creatures today and now forever and ever. Bambi and Chuck, I love you both.
It's called Soulmates. It captures beautifully the Coney Island mermaid wedding. And it is by two very talented artists and filmmakers, Heidi Jerzen and Jeffrey Abel.
There you have it.
Another match made in Carnival heaven.